Good morning, everyone. Bladen Breitreiter, incident meteorologist, here with Jasmine, sign language interpreter, to give you a weather update for the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fires for Saturday, May 21st. So we had our backdoor front come cruising down the eastern plains yesterday. It hit Las Vegas a little after 8 p.m. And as we remember with these types of fronts, they like to surge southward and westward. So it took a nice turn as it got up into the northeast highlands and started pursuing a more east-southeast to southeast direction as it got into the 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. hour, got over to the western portion here. It did lose quite a bit of momentum as it surged westward, which is to be expected. It's having to go up a whole bunch of hills here and get up into this higher terrain. A bit gustier down here as opposed to up here. So over at Las Vegas in particular, when we saw it actually come through here, we saw a spike up getting into 20 miles an hour sustained and gusts near 30 miles an hour. Not as dramatic as we got a little bit further this way. A different story altogether as we got into the west and east zones here. These easterly winds here were much reduced. We saw very little impact across this portion up here. But we did see a lot of spicy winds in the middle of the night start to get into the western portion of the perimeter here at the south zone. And then they washed over a bit, and we saw the changes across some of our raw sites, which are located over in like Willow Creek and at Davis Creek over here on the west slopes in and around the Pecos Valley here. So what came behind this front was an extraordinary invigoration of moisture. So we've seen kind of on average a 20 to 30% sort of regime as far as our overnight recovery or the moisture replenishment that we would see at night. That's in the poor category. What we saw last night was around 70 to 80%, and that's well within the good category, even getting into the excellent category for overnight recovery categories. So that's really awesome, and I think that along with some of those cooler temperatures that we saw helped to kind of diminish, we won't say erase the effects of these easterly winds, but it did kind of pad the situation a little bit. Now temperatures last night got in and around the mid 30s. Some of them even got near freezing. The further out we get out east, down in this area, we saw a little bit more into the upper 30s and into the 40s. Tonight, going to be a very different story. So let's take a look at what is happening right now. So as we're going into the day today, this is zoomed in quite a bit, but we do have an upper level trough that is draping itself across the desert southwest here. It's really hard to see, but the winds aloft are really starting to ramp up, looking at 65, even 70 knots up there. Just for a point of reference as to how knots would convert to miles per hour, that's pretty much what you would be driving on the interstate, except we're driving that in and around 10,000 feet across the atmosphere. So this is going to continue to kind of move and migrate, maybe even deepen a little bit over the next day or so. And what else is happening here is we do have some high pressure building in and around lee side of the mountains in eastern Colorado. So we're still going to see a little bit of breezy to locally windy conditions as we go through the day today. But as you can see here on the simple water vapor imagery, a whole bunch of moisture. So got a lot of clouds out there that could help to moderate those gusty winds as we go into the afternoon hours. Now, something you'll notice here, we got north winds out here at Clayton, up at Raton, looking at northeast. And then as we get into the Las Vegas area here, we have almost a purely east situation. So what's going to happen today is there going to be a little bit of a tug of war. Aloft, you see this here, which would be our kind of prevailing winds, is very west, maybe west-southwest. And then over on the eastern plains, we're going to have that kind of influence of easterly winds throughout the day. And so you're going to end up with these winds wanting to try to go one way or the other in response to all this different forcing out there. So coming back and kind of looking at it for today, we'll see these east to east-southwest, east-southeast winds persist into the afternoon, trying across this portion, basically the east slopes of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and eastward. We're going to see them really try to turn east and south as they go through the day today. The winds are going to continue to want to try and hug the terrain and get into this gap down here that's a little bit off map, and they'll turn a little bit more southerly as we get into the Pecos River Valley. But what's interesting here is they have a lot of shielding from the influences that are over here. So they're going to want to try to go a little bit this way, have a little bit more of a westerly influence, perhaps a little bit more due south. And some of the ways that we'll see that especially is in and along these slopes here. So when winds are lighter, they're going to want to follow slopes. And by that, I mean that they're not going to necessarily have the influence in the general winds to kind of force them to go a certain way. So being that this is a little bit more removed from that high pressure, it's going to want to follow those slopes, and that's kind of why we're going to see a little bit more of a southwest influence in addition to just the general pattern. And how that works is, at night and when things are cooler, the flow relaxes a bit, the ground cools down, and winds just kind of relax and want to run down into drainages. We call that downslope or down canyon. As the day heats up, we start to get those thermals, that radiant heat coming off the ground, and that's what winds tend to latch onto and run upslope. So that's kind of what terrain influence looks like, and we'll see a bit of that as we go into the day-to-day, especially along these western slopes here and within the Pecos River Valley. Your highs today are going to be greatly reduced. They're looking to be 15 to 20 degrees below normal, getting into the 60s almost predominantly, and into the upper 50s as we get into the upper elevations today. The relative humidity minimums, they're still going to be pretty low, but they're going to be much improved compared to the single digits that we've been used to for the last, since forever. And we'll see more of a 15 to 20% persuasion across the majority of the fire today. As we go into the evening, this pattern that we have here is basically going to get a secondary surge. And this resurgence is going to come in as we get into the overnight hours, pretty much like we saw yesterday, after 2100, so after 9 p.m., in and around the midnight time frame. We're going to get a second resurgence of this east wind situation. It's going to push it a little bit harder, and we're going to see a little bit better coping of those winds as it gets over into the actual ridge tops here. It's not necessarily going to get over there and peter out like it did last night. In this instance, it looks like it's actually going to come in east, get to those ridge tops, and persist east, running down slope into the Pecos River Valley. So you might have noticed that we have some status changes, in the Holy Ghost, Geronimo area, and then as we get a little bit further south, similarly into Upper La Posada, Tres Lagunas, and Pecos, you'll notice some changes in your status for evacuation because of that. So those easterly winds are going to persist into the night. That is really for south zone. As we get a little bit further north into west and east zone, you're still going to see a little bit of that influence, but you guys are probably going to see more of that terrain influence because they're going to be a lot lighter. What's actually happening is we're going to see gap winds tonight. So the Santa Fe area, the Albuquerque area, these winds are going to continue to surge, and they're going to get channeled into these gaps and head into some of those metro areas. So the strongest winds will actually be down here below us, but that doesn't rule out that we're not going to see some of those stronger winds in and around the southern portion of the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fire as we go into tonight. Now, the other thing to think of tonight, we're going to continue to have good to excellent recovery, so that's one really good thing. We're also going to be seeing freezing temperatures. So we haven't seen that for a little bit either, and it's going to be very evident across some of our higher ridge tops here and some of those deep valley bottoms. So bundle up as we're going into the night tonight. So really quick look at the extended here. So here was Saturday today. We got our frontal passage, we got our wind shifts, we got our kind of spicier winds. But as you see going into Sunday, that changes a lot. We're more predominantly into the green and yellow territory, looking at a slight warm-up, another slight bump in our minimum humidity recovery, a bit more stable because of all of those fronts, and 18 to 28 as a high end for our winds. Winds are going to be more south, and then they'll turn a little bit south-southeast as we go in through the day tomorrow. Monday, that warming and drying trend continues. We'll see stuff try to get back down into those upper single digits and lower double digits for our relative humidity minimums. The instability returns, but winds stay a little bit more southern Sangre de Cristo status quo, being in that more breezy category as opposed to that critical fire weather sort of category, and a shift to the south-southwest. Tuesday is going to be our day to watch, so we get a little bit of relief in temperatures, another invigoration of moisture. It's a little bit more stable as far as the Haines is concerned. But as far as meteorological instability, pure instability, we're going to see a little bit of an uptick. And that is evident here in that chance of thunder, along with some switching and around yet another frontal passage with northeast and southwest winds. So that's all I have for you guys today. Be very aware of what is going on in your communities, especially if you guys are located in and around the Pecos River Valley. We're going to see a lot of meandering winds tonight that could really impact some of the stuff out there. So please be safe, stay rock and roll, and I'll see you tomorrow.